I always knew my life was too perfect to be true. I've spent 50 years dissecting risk, structuring hostile takeovers, and calculating the exact moment a market correction hits. I dealt in certainties, in verified data, in contracts ironclad enough to withstand an SEC audit. I am, by nature, an auditor of reality. My former life, the one I left behind 10 years ago on Wall Street, was based entirely on the premise that emotions are liabilities and only verifiable facts matter. Now my reality is Greenwich, Connecticut. The air smells like salt and old money. My primary occupation is the restoration of vintage clocks and pre-war mahogany furniture in my ridiculously expensive workshop attached to a house that could probably fund a small nation, SGDP. I am David Armstrong, the quiet retiree, the aging husband, the man whose hands are now perpetually dusted with sawdust instead of ink. This entire existence, the tranquility, the predictability, the utter lack of high-stakes leverage, was a conscious choice. A meticulously constructed shield designed to protect the one asset I truly valued, my son. Ethan, 10 years old. A walking anomaly of curiosity and pure, incandescent joy. He's all angles and elbows right now, but he has Jennifer's sharp, analytical mind, and thank God, my capacity for quiet observation. He's my shadow, especially in the workshop. He doesn't care about the market or leverage ratios. He just cares about the way the grain of old wood tells a story. And I cherished every second of it, because that boy, that miracle, was the culmination of a decade of heartache. We spent years chasing the biological imperative, failed IVF rounds, crushing defeats in specialized clinics from Boston to San Diego. Every appointment was a negotiation with disappointment. When the doctors finally delivered the blunt, sterile reality that my sample was, for all intents and purposes, a non-starter, the term they used was severe non-viability, I felt the floor drop out. But Jennifer, bless her relentless architect soul, refused to surrender. Surrogacy. That was the solution. A costly, emotionally taxing, legally complex route. But when Ethan was placed in my arms, small, perfect, and screaming, it didn't matter. He was mine. We did this. We built this family. That shared history, that arduous, documented journey, was the bedrock of my certainty. It was the contract I never thought to audit again. And that's the funny thing about life. You can be the predator, the strategist, the one who sets the traps. But sometimes, the universe delivers the fatal blow through something so utterly benign, so utterly consumer. It started innocently enough last fall. Ethan's fifth-grade class had a genealogy project. Jennifer, ever the enthusiast, suggested, "Why don't we do those DNA kits, David? 23andMe, it'll be fun. We can map out our deep ancestry for Ethan's display board." I scoffed internally. DNA kits. They were a fun parlor trick for people who didn't understand the true value of data security. But I saw the eagerness in Ethan's eyes, and I saw Jennifer's genuine desire to make the project special. I was retired. My secrets were buried deep. What harm could a saliva sample do? "Fine," I said, putting down the oil rag. "But we'll use the anonymizing protocols. No sharing with third parties." It was the Wall Street reflex. Always protect your principal. We swabbed the inside of our cheeks, packaged the tubes, and dropped them off at the FedEx office in Stamford. It felt ridiculous, like paying a fortune teller to tell you what you already knew. The subsequent week was agonizing only in retrospect. I went about my routine, the rhythmic squeak of the lathe, the smell of pine and linseed oil. I was analyzing the yield curve, trying to predict the Federal Reserve's next move just to keep my mind sharp. I completely forgot about the little white box full of my cellular history. Then, 10 days later, the email arrived. A clinical, automated notification. Your results are ready. I was sitting at the breakfast nook, sipping my coffee, enjoying the morning paper. The light was perfect. Ethan was upstairs getting ready for school. I opened the secure PDF link on my tablet. I saw Jennifer, SMAP, 40% Irish, 35% German, the usual Northeastern patchwork. Then I clicked on Ethan's results. And then finally, I clicked on the kinship comparison. The data loaded instantaneously. I read the section labeled Parent-Child Relationship Probability. The number wasn't 99, 999%. The number wasn't to 50%. The number wasn't to even a trace amount. It was 0%, 0.000. I, David Armstrong, a man who had manipulated markets and built a multi-million-dollar fortune on the principle of verifiable certainty, had just discovered that the foundation of my entire life was a lie. And the truth came to me in the form of a consumer genetics kit. I didn't panic. I didn't scream. Panic is for amateurs. I simply set the tablet down, picked up the ceramic coffee mug, and watched the small brown liquid circle the rim. My brain immediately switched from father mode to hostile takeover mode. The first thought wasn't rage or betrayal. It was a cold, analytical deduction. Error is unacceptable. My immediate next step was to audit the data. I needed 3 more independent certifications before I could allow emotion to pollute the equation. I was going to find the source of the error. If the result held, I was going to find the source of the deceit. And then, I was going to apply surgical, devastating force. Because a lie this deep wasn't just an infidelity, it was a fraud. It was a hostile occupation of my family, and I, David Armstrong, had just found the weakness in the target company's balance sheet. My target was the lie itself, and the people who built it. I just hadn't realized yet that the biological source of the deceit, the man who was the true 100%, was already sitting at my dining room table every Thanksgiving, smiling that easy, smug smile of the man who thought he was a friend of the family. I realized then, with absolute chilling clarity, that the lie had a name, Mark Olson. I spent the next 48 hours in a kind of suspended reality. My internal world had been ripped apart, but externally, the performance had to be flawless. I was the stoic patriarch, kissing Ethan goodbye for school, asking Jennifer about her new architectural commission. Every polite exchange was a layer of insulation, keeping the pressure of the truth contained until I could weaponize it. My workshop became my war room. The smell of cedar couldn't mask the metallic scent of impending confrontation. I immediately executed Phase 1 verification. I didn't just order 2 more consumer kits. That was insufficient. I called Lil Griffin, my former personal assistant, and now the quiet manager of my private family office, the only person outside of my attorney who understood the true extent of my network and my capacity for strategic dismantling. Lil, I need 3 things, and I need them yesterday, I told her, my voice low, steady, and devoid of the easy pleasantries she was used to. Lil recognized the tone. It was the voice of a man who was about to collapse a market segment. Anything, David? Legal, financial, or cleaner? She asked. Lil always knew the appropriate categories. Biological first. I need a rapid, legally admissible paternity test. Full sequencing. I want a company that specializes in forensic work, not consumer entertainment. Send the kits to 3 separate, discrete locations. Use burner phones and shell companies for payment. No digital trail leading back to the Armstrong residence in Greenwich. Understood. The results will bypass the mail and go straight to secure endpoints, Lil confirmed. Second, I continued, pacing my workshop floor, the polished walnut reflecting the anxiety I refused to feel. I need a complete profile on Mark Olson, everything. His law firm's financials, his personal debt structure, mortgages, property titles, offshore accounts, political donations, his divorce settlement, and any unofficial relationships he has maintained over the last 5 years. I want to know where his financial vulnerabilities lie, and if he is dealing in anything that smells like SEC non-compliance. A pause on the line. Even Lil was impressed by the scope. That sounds like a deep dive, David. Did he default on a loan you guaranteed? He defaulted on something far more valuable than money, Lil. Get me the balance sheet on his life. I need every red flag. Consider it done. The third request, I kept to myself for a few more hours. While the forensic kits were processing, my mind, sharp and unforgiving, began its internal audit of Mark Olson. Mark, goddamn Mark. He was the permanent fixture, the benign, affable friend of the family from Jennifer's Yale days. He was always there, helping us move furniture, dropping by with expensive wine, organizing couples' weekends that Jennifer adored. He was the perfect, charming foil to my quiet intensity. He was loud where I was silent, expressive where I was reserved. He was, quite frankly, exhausting, but I tolerated him. Jennifer needed that easy, social energy, and I had always viewed him as harmless, a necessary social appliance. Now those memories played back in the cold glare of 0% kinship. The way he'd look at Ethan, not with a friend, his casual affection, but with a deep, proprietary pride. The way he always seemed to gravitate toward coaching Ethan's soccer team, even though he lived 20 miles away. The coincidental trips they took together, skiing, fishing. I remember once, when Ethan was 5, he fell off his bike and broke his arm. I rushed him to the emergency room, terrified. Mark showed up 20 minutes later, breathless, saying Jennifer had called him because he lived closer to the hospital. I hadn't even thought to call Jennifer yet. She was stuck in a board meeting in Manhattan. It wasn't proximity, it was urgency. He was staking a claim, planting a flag, always ensuring he was in the vicinity of his asset. The cold truth settled. Mark wasn't just a friendly face. He was an invasive species. He was the silent partner in the greatest fraud ever perpetrated against me. 48 hours later, the forensic results landed on my secure server simultaneously from 3 different labs in San Diego, Baltimore, and London. They were meticulous, detailed, and utterly conclusive. Paternity exclusion, 100%. The error was not in the data. The error was in the person I had married. I leaned back in my chair, the scent of wood shavings suddenly sickeningly sweet. The facts were confirmed. The emotional phase could now commence. But my anger wasn't a hot fire. It was glacial. It was the calculated, relentless pressure that reshapes continents. Jennifer was coming home soon. I knew how I had to play this. No rage, no accusations, just the presentation of unimpeachable facts. I wasn't a betrayed husband anymore. I was a prosecutor building a case, and I needed the confession to finalize the indictment. I grabbed a clean white towel from the workbench and methodically wiped the lingering dust from my hands, cleaning them for the confrontation. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. The retiree was gone. The predator was back. The first step was to lock the vault. I went to the downstairs safe, opened the compartment holding my contracts, and pulled out an old black leather briefcase. Inside were the originals of every document related to Ethan's birth, the surrogacy contract, the clinic paperwork, the donation agreements, everything. I needed to see exactly how she had created this immaculate, decade-long fabrication. The key to solving a fraud is understanding the paperwork. And I was about to find the signature of the lie. I spent the evening alone in the house, waiting. Jennifer was at a late-running dinner with clients in the city. The silence in the Greenwich house was now less peaceful and more menacing, the heavy silence that precedes an artillery barrage. I used the time to perform the final, crucial step before the confrontation, tracing the paper trail. I spread out the old documents on my mahogany dining table, the surrogacy contract, the detailed medical history, the consent forms. They were all there, a monument to our shared desperation and eventual triumph. I focused on the intake forms from the specialized fertility clinic we had used 10 years ago, the one that ultimately confirmed my severe non-viability. They were exhaustive. I remembered the sheer clinical exhaustion of those days. Then I found it. The Sperm Source Declaration section. In 2013, we had signed a clause declaring that if the primary partner sample failed to produce viable embryos, we would either terminate the cycle or utilize a certified, anonymous donor from the clinic's regulated bank, following strict legal protocols regarding future identity disclosure and parental rights waiver. Jennifer's signature was right next to mine, consenting to these terms. Yet here was Ethan, 0% mine. If she had used the clinic as anonymous donor, the deception would have been contained. The biological father would be a ghost, a file number, shielded by layers of legal protection. The fraud would have been a lie of omission, painful, but manageable. But the 0% result, combined with Mark, obsessive presence, told a different story. She hadn't used the anonymous bank. She had used a known donor, violating every protocol, and in doing so, she had created a legal and biological vulnerability that now threatened my son. Why Mark? Why risk bringing a familiar face into the most sensitive, legally fraught part of our lives? Because Mark was her legacy. He represented her past, her youth, perhaps even the life she subconsciously felt she should have had. She hadn't chosen a perfect genetic sample. She had chosen a piece of her own history, wrapped it up, and presented it to me as our future. The clock on the mantelpiece chimed 11:30 p.m. Her car pulled into the driveway. I moved from the dining room to the home office. I gathered the 3 lab results and the clinic's sperm source declaration. I didn't hide them. I placed them prominently on the large antique desk. I turned on only the desk lamp, casting the room in sharp contrast, the light on the facts, the shadows on everything else. The door opened. Jennifer walked in, tired, elegant, and smiling faintly. "Sorry, David. That client is relentless. God, I need a shower." She paused, noticing the arrangement on the desk, the papers, and my stance. I was standing perfectly still, like an old hunter who had finally smelled his prey. "What is all this?" she asked, her voice dropping. I didn't offer a preamble. I didn't use an emotional trigger. I used data. "Sit down, Jennifer." We need to discuss the genealogy project, specifically the data integrity surrounding the sample submission. She sat, her professional facade instantly hardening, recognizing the deadly seriousness in my tone. I picked up the first printout. This is a 23andMe kinship probability report for Ethan and me. Result 0%. I filed a secondary audit. This, I put down the other two folders, is the result from Genome Diagnostics of Baltimore and Forensic Labs, Inc. of London. Identical conclusion. Zero biological connection, Jennifer. You see, when the sample integrity is this clean across 3 independent labs, the data is not the variable. The premise is... Jennifer's face went white, the color draining so fast she looked sculpted from chalk. Her composure cracked instantly, falling away like cheap plaster. She stared at the papers, then at me. David, I can explain. I'm sure you can, I said, my voice level, almost conversational. But before you attempt to construct an explanation, look at this. I pointed to the sperm source declaration we both signed. In 2013, we agreed to use an anonymous donor, legally vetted, if my sample failed. You chose not to do that. The data confirms you utilized a known, unauthorized source, thereby exposing our family unit to extreme legal and personal risk. I leaned in, resting my knuckles on the desk. This was the moment for the psychological pressure. Who, Jennifer? Who was the known donor? And don't insult my intelligence by claiming it was a stranger you met on the street. She broke. The tears were instant, racking her body with dry, silent sobs that felt manufactured, but were clearly genuine. Genuine shame. Genuine fear. It was Mark, she choked out. Mark Olson. I absorbed the name without a flicker of reaction. My strategic mind had already confirmed it, but hearing it, spoken aloud in the silence of the room, was like a seismic shock. Why Jennifer? Why him? He was the only person I trusted. He knew what we were going through. When the clinic told me about your results, I panicked, David. I was 38. I couldn't face starting over. I wanted this so badly. Mark. He had always been reliable. He offered. He said he would never tell, that it was a gift. He was already vetted, healthy, intelligent. Everything I knew you would want in a contribution. He was your past, I summarized coldly, and you used him to hijack my future. It was to save our future. David, I was desperate. It was the only way I knew how to give you the son you deserved, the son we desperately wanted. He's your son, David, he is. You raised him. Biology means nothing. She had hit on the core moral conflict, but it didn't excuse the fraud. Biology means nothing, I repeated, picking up the stack of papers and tapping them sharply against the desk. But control means everything. You didn't just lie to me, Jennifer. You installed a back door into our lives, a biological claim holder, a man who, if he ever decides to stop being a good friend, has the absolute right to stake his claim on my son. I stood up, the silence ringing in the room. The confession is complete. Now, the analysis begins. This is not a divorce proceeding, Jennifer. This is a damage control operation, and I am taking over command. I left her sitting there, shaking, the architect whose entire structure had just been condemned. I walked out of the office and headed straight to my phone. I had Phase 3 to activate. I had Lil's dossier on Mark Olson now. I needed to know the true extent of his vulnerabilities before he realized the game was on, because Mark Olson was about to learn the difference between being an amiable lawyer and being a target in a David Armstrong hostile takeover. The next morning was strangely routine. Jennifer looked ravaged, like a high-rise building after an internal structural fire, but she managed to maintain a brittle semblance of normalcy for Ethan. Ethan, oblivious, was thrilled about a field trip. I, however, was in the Reserve House, a small, highly secure retreat in northern Westchester, hidden under the guise of an investment property. This was where I went when the world got messy, and it allowed me to run the operation without contaminating the environment where Ethan lived. Lil Griffin's comprehensive profile on Mark Olson was waiting for me. I spent the day reading it. It wasn't just a financial audit. It was a character dissection. Mark Olson, 51, Stamford-based real estate attorney, partner at a medium-sized, prestigious firm. Divorced 3 years ago from a woman who took him to the cleaners because, according to the affidavits Lil dug up, he was pathologically incapable of fidelity and chronically over-leveraged. The financials, the veneer of wealth, was thin. Mark drove a late-model Mercedes and owned a flashy condo, but it was all debt-funded. He maintained multiple revolving credit lines, and his investment portfolio was a desperate scramble of high-risk ventures, mostly speculative local commercial real estate deals. He needed liquidity, and he needed it yesterday. His firm, while successful, was constantly asking him to rein in his expense accounts. The weakness Mark's deepest vulnerability wasn't financial desperation. It was professional narcissism. He saw himself as the brilliant deal-maker, the operator who understood the angles. He craved recognition and association with real power. He was obsessed with the idea of achieving the status I had effortlessly walked away from. The threat assessment, critically, Lil found evidence that Mark was showing subtle signs of increased engagement with Ethan. Not just the friendly soccer coach facade. He had recently inquired about Ethan's trust fund structure with Jennifer, under the guise of estate planning advice. He was subtly testing the boundaries. He knew Ethan was his son, and while he might have initially seen his donation as a gift, 10 years of proximity had clearly shifted his perspective. He was building his case for future involvement, waiting for the right moment to step out of the shadows. This confirmed my strategic thesis. Mark Olson wasn't a passive liability. He was an active threat preparing to initiate a legal skirmish. If he moved, I couldn't just fight him. I had to neutralize him entirely, permanently. I wasn't trying to win a custody battle. I was conducting an extinction-level event. I realized I couldn't simply threaten him with the exposure of his personal life. Mark thrived on drama. I had to hit him where his ego and his wallet intersected. I had to offer him a prize so dazzling, so seductive, that he would voluntarily sign away his biological rights for it. The target was his greed. The weapon was my reputation. I called Lil back. The Mark Olson file is excellent. Now we proceed to Phase 4, constructing the illusion. The illusion. We are going to give Mark the impression that I am initiating the biggest leveraged buyout of my career. A massive real estate development in downtown Stamford, right in his backyard. A multi-hundred-million-dollar opportunity that requires a local legal expert who can navigate the messy details of zoning and local politics. We need a phantom client, a phantom deal, and a phantom investment vehicle. Make it complicated, make it look exclusive, and make the projected legal fees astronomical. Make him believe this is his exit ramp to true wealth. Lil immediately understood. You are offering him a poisoned chalice, a golden parachute with a stipulation. Exactly. The money needs to be just within his reach, but the deal must be structured such that any conflict of interest, any potential legal challenge, especially concerning family dynamics, would immediately jeopardize the entire transaction and expose him to a catastrophic liability claim from my phantom entity. I'll create the shell company structure immediately. We'll leak the initial concept through 2 trusted but gossipy sources in the Stamford real estate community. Mark will hear it by lunchtime tomorrow. Perfect. And Lil, I added, lowering my voice further. The key element of this deception is my direct involvement. I need him to think I selected him. I need to feed his narcissism. He's not getting a contract from a clerk. He's getting a personal invitation from David Armstrong himself. I hung up, feeling the familiar, thrilling tension of the high-stakes game. My hands, which had been restoring antique clocks, were now once again manipulating high-value assets and human psychology. Meanwhile, Jennifer was texting me, desperate for guidance, terrified of my cold silence. David, please talk to me. I need to know what you're planning. We can let this hurt Ethan. I didn't answer immediately. I needed to ensure she understood the gravity of the situation and her role in the upcoming operation. She was a co-conspirator in the original fraud. She would now be a controlled variable in my cleanup operation. I finally typed a short, clinical response. My priority is the structural integrity of this family. Yours is to follow instructions. You will tell Mark Olson, if he asks, that I am deeply immersed in a new, extremely complicated commercial investment that requires absolute focus and discretion. Do not offer more details. Do not mention the D word. Our life continues as normal. For Ethan. Until I decide otherwise. I set my phone aside. The game had begun. The first move was to make Mark Olson feel like the smartest man in the room. He was about to learn that when David Armstrong gives you a shovel, it's not for digging gold. It's for digging your own grave. The rumor took exactly 24 hours to travel from Lil, strategically planted contacts, to Mark Olson's desk. It wasn't direct. It was perfectly calibrated. A whisper over a third-party golf game, a calculated mention at a bar frequented by Stamford as mid-level power brokers. David Armstrong, the Greenwich Ghost, is back. Looking at a monstrous, high-density residential commercial conversion deal near the train station. Massive zoning hurdles. Needs an aggressive local genius. The fishing line was cast. I just had to wait for the tug. The tug came late Thursday afternoon, not to me but to Jennifer. She was visibly anxious when she walked into the workshop, where I was pretending to meticulously reassemble a 19th century Swiss music box. I hadn't touched her since the confession, and the space between us was vast and glacial. Mark called, she whispered, looking over her shoulder as if Ethan might appear. He asked about you. He was excited. He said, "Is David really back in the game? I heard he's sniffing around that old industrial zone." I didn't look up from the delicate gears. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him exactly what you said, that you were deeply focused on a very large, complicated commercial investment that required absolute discretion. I told him you looked stressed, consumed by the details." I smiled inwardly. Stress was a sign of serious stakes, a lure for a man who equates stress with importance. "Good. Did he offer his services? He hinted, very strongly. He said he'd be happy to review any local issues or provide initial counsel just as a friend. Predictable, I muttered, carefully placing a tiny ruby jewel bearing into its housing. He's testing the water, puffing out his chest. He wants to be chosen. So what now? Do you call him? No, I stated firmly. He calls me, and he needs to call me feeling like he's forcing the issue, not like he's responding to a job posting. Mark needs to feel like the deal to move forward without his unique brilliance. I gave her the second piece of bait. Naikin. The next time he calls, tell him you overheard me cursing about the complexity of the easement rights and the historical property claims on the parcel. Make it sound arcane and frustrating, something only a local expert would understand. Jennifer nodded, her face etched with exhaustion. She was my unwilling accomplice, and her compliance was absolute now. The fear of losing Ethan was a powerful motivator, overriding every moral compromise she had made. Mark called me the following evening. I let the call go to voicemail, a deliberate, controlled delay. When I finally called him back late the next morning, I used a burner number, injecting another layer of strategic separation. Mark. David Armstrong, I hear you've been asking after me, I said, my voice warm but guarded, the voice of a powerful man annoyed at being bothered, but intrigued by the effort. David, good to hear your voice, man. Yeah, I just heard a whisper. Stamford's small, you know. Sounds like you were finally putting that genius brain back to work. Huge congratulations. Mark's tone was smooth, oozing professional charm and false camaraderie. It's not final yet, Mark. It's a bear of a deal, frankly. Title disputes going back 100 years, restrictive covenants. Most lawyers would run screaming. But not me, David. Mark jumped in, precisely as I anticipated. That's what I do. I thrive on those impossible knots. I know the Stamford zoning board like the back of my hand. This is local terrain, David. Not a hostile takeover of a tech company. This is about knowing the people, the obscure case law, the leverage points that the big Manhattan firms miss. I let a moment of silence hang, giving the impression I was carefully considering his brazen self-promotion. You might have a point, Mark. My internal team is useless on the ground floor specifics. This deal, if it goes through, involves structuring a multi-entity development fund. It requires absolute confidentiality and legal perfection. We are talking about potentially hundreds of millions in capital commitment. I dropped the line. Look, I need someone who is not only discreet, but who has absolutely zero conflicts of interest, personal or professional, that could derail this. I need a ghost in the machine. David, my conflicts are zero. Mark lied smoothly. I am divorced, fully professional, and ready to sign any non-disclosure or non-compete you require. Zero conflicts, I mused. That was the crucial phrase. All right, Mark. I'll send you an initial prospectus, highly redacted, and a framework for the legal engagement. My executive assistant, Lil, will contact you. Read it carefully. I don't hire people who miss the fine print. The last part was delivered with a smile I knew Mark couldn't see, but could certainly feel. I was dangling the prize, but reminding him I was the one holding the leash. He was so focused on the dollar signs that he wouldn't register the subtle threat. The immediate objective was achieved. Mark Olson was locked on to the target. Now, I had to solidify the deception. I contacted Lil and instructed her to craft the most complex, binding, and financially terrifying contract Mark had ever seen. The document needed two key features buried deep in Section 4. 3. Conflict resolution and Section 6. 1. General liability waivers. 1. A massive financial penalty for any disclosure that compromises the deal structure. 2. A broad, sweeping clause requiring the signatory to irrevocably waive any and all latent claims that might constitute a future or ongoing conflict of interest with the principal partner's immediate family structure, specifically including any claim that might relate to personal associations or relationships predating this engagement. The wording had to be so dense, so buried in boilerplate legal jargon, that Mark, as greedy eyes would skim right over it, focused only on the enormous hourly rate and the 7-figure success bonus. I knew Mark would be blinded by the illusion of partnership with David Armstrong. He was about to sell his only truly irreplaceable asset, his parental rights, for a phantom contract that would never close. The auction was open, and Mark was the highest bidder against himself. Lil was relentless. The legal framework she delivered was a work of art, a 40-page masterpiece of obfuscation and punitive liability. It detailed the complex structure of the phantom development entity, Stamford Legacy Holdings, LP, and the astronomical fees involved. The retainer alone was enough to pay off Mark's current mortgage issues. I instructed Lil to deliver the documents via a high-end, discreet courier service to Mark's office. Attached was a brief cover letter signed by me, Mark. This is highly confidential. We need you to review, sign the NDA, and return the commitment letter by 5 p.m. tomorrow. Time is money, and we move fast. DA, the pressure was crucial. Mark needed to feel the urgency of a high-level transaction, which discourages detailed reading and encourages reflexive compliance driven by greed. That evening, I was home, sitting at the dining table with Ethan, helping him with a science project on simple machines. Jennifer was in the kitchen, avoiding my gaze, moving through our shared space like a carefully choreographed automaton. My phone vibrated. It was Mark. David, I've reviewed the preliminary docs. Exceptional, massive scope. I can handle this. Where do I send the signed NDA? When can we meet to discuss the title strategy? I waited an hour before responding, again reinforcing the impression that Mark was a subordinate, not a co-equal. Lil will handle the NDA exchange. Regarding strategy, I prefer to operate outside the office. Meet me at 9 a.m. tomorrow, my workshop in Greenwich. Be prepared to sign the full engagement contract immediately after our discussion. Come alone. No digital recordings, no staff. This stays between us. Satin, I chose the workshop for the meeting deliberately. It was my sanctuary, my ultimate position of control. In my previous life, high-stakes meetings took place in glass towers or private jets. Here, surrounded by the honest scent of aged wood and the rhythmic tick of meticulous mechanisms, I was the master, not the retiree. Mark, the polished Stamford lawyer, would walk into that space and immediately feel a psychological advantage. I am the lawyer, he is just a carpenter now. He would underestimate the mind behind the apron. That underestimation was the final layer of the trap. 9 a.m. the following day, Mark pulled up in his shiny black Mercedes, looking immaculate in a tailored suit and a confident, expectant smile. I met him at the large mahogany workbench. I was wearing my usual attire, old jeans, a thick cotton shirt, and my leather apron. I looked completely non-threatening. "Mark, thanks for coming," I said, offering a weak cup of coffee from a dented thermos, the opposite of his usual expensive espresso habits. "David, this space is incredible," Mark said, glancing around, his eyes assessing the machinery, the collection of vintage clocks. "Real hands-on stuff. Must be nice to unwind from the chaos." "It is. But sometimes the chaos finds you, Mark. This Stamford deal is chaos structured for profit." I laid out 2 large documents on the workbench. One was the full, intricate legal contract for Stamford Legacy Holdings, LP. The other was a simple 1-page document titled Binding Irrevocable Personal and Conflict Waiver. "We need to finalize this today," I stated, tapping the complex contract. "We'll go over the strategy for the initial land acquisition after you sign. But first, let's handle the administrative clarity." I pushed the simple 1-page waiver toward him. "This is standard for me, Mark. Total transparency. You know my reputation. I am ruthless about conflict. If there is any potential for future litigation or conflict of interest, even vaguely related to personal life, it has to be disclosed and waived now. We can have anything blow up this deal down the line." Mark barely glanced at the waiver. His eyes were glued to the main contract, specifically the section detailing the retainer and the success fee. He picked up the waiver dismissively. "David, relax. I already told you. I have 0 conflicts. I'm a professional." He skimmed the page, probably reading only the header. He missed it. Section 3, subsection C, detailing the waiver of any latent claims related to the principal partner's immediate family structure. "I appreciate the professionalism, Mark," I said, handing him an expensive fountain pen. "Sign both, here, and initial every page of the main engagement." Mark signed the waiver with a flourish, eager to get to the real document. His greed and his ego, the belief that he was already on the inside track, had blinded him. He had legally attested that he had no undisclosed conflicts of interest concerning the Armstrong family. He spent the next 5 minutes initialing the dense engagement contract. When he was done, he sat back, smug, rubbing his hands together. "There. Done. Now tell me about the title strategy. I'm thinking we go aggressive on the Smith property easement." I carefully picked up both documents. I stacked them neatly and placed them in a locking wooden box I had prepared. I locked the box and dropped the key into my apron pocket. "The title strategy is immaterial, Mark." My voice had changed. It was low, hard, and utterly devoid of warmth. The retiree facade vanished. Mark's confident smile faltered. "Immaterial. What are you talking about, David? We just signed the contract." "Oh, you signed the contract, Mark. Flawlessly. But the contract for Stamford Legacy Holdings is entirely immaterial because Stamford Legacy Holdings is a phantom entity. It holds 0 assets, and it has 0 intent to pursue any real estate in Stamford." The color drained from Mark, his face for the second time in 3 days. "What? Is this some kind of joke?" I placed the 3 forensic DNA reports on the workbench right in front of him. Paternity exclusion, 100%. "It is not a joke, Mark. It is a hostile takeover. You signed the conflict waiver 5 minutes ago, attesting under penalty of perjury and massive financial liability to my fund, that you have absolutely no latent claims or undisclosed conflicts concerning the principal partner. As immediate family structure." I pointed to the 0% on the DNA test. "You see, Mark, 10 years ago, You donated a very valuable biological asset to my family under the false premise of anonymity. Over the last decade, you've attempted to monetize that donation by inserting yourself into my son's life. You became a financial and legal threat to the one thing I value above everything else. That is a conflict of interest, Mark. A very large one. I fixed him with a stare that had chilled boardrooms. Congratulations, Mark. You just sold your biological claim on my son for the retainer of a job that doesn't exist, and you didn't even read the fine print. Mark didn't rage immediately. He went silent, his mind scrambling, desperately trying to find the flaw in the logic, the escape route, the angle he had missed. The silence in the workshop was deafening, broken only by the steady, unforgiving tick of an antique grandfather clock in the corner, a sound of time running out. "This is insane," he finally hissed, his voice trembling. "This is entrapment, David. The waiver is worthless. It was executed under fraudulent inducement." Fraudulent inducement. I smiled, a tight, unpleasant expression that didn't reach my eyes. Fraudulent inducement is what you and Jennifer perpetrated against me for 10 years. You created a secret biological claim and positioned yourself to exploit it. My maneuver, Mark, is a cleanup operation, not a fraud. And regarding the contract's validity, you're the lawyer. Read Section 6.1 again, the section on latent claims and undisclosed liabilities. It states that by signing, you acknowledge any later discovered conflict, regardless of prior knowledge or inducement, is subject to the severe penalties outlined in Section 4.3, up to and including disclosure of any and all related financial entanglements to prevent systemic risk to the fund. I picked up Lil Xaok's dossier. And that, Mark, brings us to your financial entanglements. Lil Griffin is excellent. She found the bridge loan from the non-traditional lender in Bridgeport, the one you didn't fully disclose to your firm. She found the inflated invoices on your condo renovation, potentially indicating tax issues. And she found the email thread discussing the re-titling opportunity of that dilapidated property in New Haven, a transaction which, if audited, might expose some questionable ethics in client representation. Mark's face was now a map of sheer terror. His expensive suit suddenly looked threadbare. He realized he hadn't just been audited, he had been X-rayed. "You audited my life for this," he stammered. "When you threaten my son, Mark, I don't settle for a simple audit. I conduct an aggressive, hostile dissolution. You forced my hand. You gave Jennifer the gift of the sperm, but you constantly inserted yourself into Ethan's life. Why? Because you wanted to be the hero. You wanted to be the smart, charming, alternate father. You liked the drama, didn't you? The secret. You wanted the prestige without the dirty work of diaper changes and middle-of-the-night fevers. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper of pure venom. But you overplayed your hand. You didn't just want to be the friend, you wanted to be the replacement. That is a conflict of interest, Mark. And now, you have legally waived all rights to pursue that claim. Mark tried to rally. You can't ruin my career over this. I'll file a motion. I'll tell Jennifer I was coerced. You will tell no one, Mark. You will disappear. The contract you signed dictates that if you attempt to publicly claim any association with me, my family, or this non-existent fund, it triggers the clause. The resulting investigation into conflict of interest, required to protect the Phantom Fund's fiduciary duty, will result in the immediate and meticulous public disclosure of every financial transgression you have committed over the last 5 years. You would ruin me over a child who isn't even your blood. He is my blood in every sense that matters. I raised him. I love him. I protected him. You are merely a raw material I briefly utilized to achieve an outcome, and now I am removing the contaminated byproduct. You are expendable, Mark. You will tell Jennifer that the Stamford deal required your full, immediate, and long-term relocation to an undisclosed location, Dubai perhaps, or Singapore, something suitably impressive and distant. I paused, letting the final absolute order sink in. You have 2 hours to clear your most essential belongings from your office. Your resignation will be submitted by noon tomorrow, effective immediately. If you contact Jennifer or Ethan again, ever, I will ensure that the State Bar Association receives the full, beautifully documented package on your financial conduct, courtesy of Stamford Legacy Holdings, LP. And believe me, Mark, I can make a criminal investigation look like an inconvenience compared to an ethical one. I watched him. The realization of his total, catastrophic failure finally hit. He was trapped not by force, but by the legal architecture of his own greed. He had lost the opportunity to be a biological father forever, and all he had to show for it was a debt-laden lifestyle and a phantom contract. He pushed back from the workbench, his composure shattered. You're a monster, David. No, Mark, I'm a protector. Monsters are the people who build their future on a foundation of calculated deception. You will find that my silence is far more valuable to your career than your pathetic attempts at paternity ever were. Now get out of my sight and never come back. He stumbled out of the workshop, defeated. I heard the Mercedes screech away moments later. The fish was unhooked, but it was ruined. I stood there, surrounded by the quiet precision of my clocks. The operation was a success. But the victory felt cold and heavy, like a block of granite. The lie was gone, but the fundamental breach remained. I had dismantled the threat, but I hadn't yet addressed the wreckage with Jennifer. And that was the hardest structural challenge of all. I took the small, locked wooden box containing the contracts and the waivers and placed it in my safe, next to the original clinic documents. The records of the fraud were now sealed, protected by the evidence of my strategic, preemptive strike. The sound of Ethan's laughter drifted in from the backyard. He was kicking a soccer ball. My son. My true son. The biological truth was ugly, but the paternal truth was absolute. I had done what needed to be done to ensure his safety. But the man who had retired to find peace was now burdened with a silence far heavier than any conflict. Mark was gone. It was swift, clean, and utterly untraceable. Lil ensured that his sudden relocation was explained with just enough detail: a major client restructuring in the Middle East, a huge confidential deal, to satisfy the superficial curiosity of their social circle. The story fed Mark's ego even in absentia. He was so important, he vanished. Jennifer, though deeply rattled by my coldness, was forced to play her part. When she asked me where Mark was, I gave her a modified version of the truth, omitting the financial blackmail. He signed a massive legal contract for a foreign entity I helped structure, I said, leaning against the kitchen counter, my tone distant. It required his immediate departure and absolute non-disclosure. He's out of our lives, Jennifer, permanently. He won't be back. She searched my eyes, looking for fury, for triumph. for anything human, but she only found the impenetrable mask of the hedge fund manager. "Did you hurt him, David?" she asked, her voice hushed with residual fear. "I gave him a choice, Jennifer. He chose money over proximity. He chose his ambition over the biological claim he was preparing to leverage against us. Mark showed his true colors, and they were always green." I watched as the realization dawned on her. The man she trusted, the man whose DNA she had used to build her deception, had abandoned his son for a phantom paycheck. The depth of her original error became terrifyingly clear to her. "He would have come after Ethan, wouldn't he?" she whispered. "Absolutely. And you opened the door for him. You created the legal and biological vulnerability, Jennifer. I closed it. Do you understand the difference?" "I understand," she said, her voice barely audible. "I understand that I almost destroyed everything." This was the pivot point in our relationship. The old marriage, based on affection and shared dreams, was dead. It was replaced by a strategic partnership, based on mutual self-preservation and the non-negotiable asset, Ethan. Our relationship is now defined by one criterion: the welfare of Ethan, I stated, my eyes fixed on hers. We will maintain the appearance of normalcy. We will co-parent with flawless coordination. But understand this: trust is gone. You compromised my most fundamental values, truth and control. We live in the same house, but we no longer share the same life. The arrangement was brutal, but clean. Jennifer accepted it with the humility of a defeated nation signing a treaty. She knew I could, with a phone call, shred her reputation and take sole custody based on her documented deception. But I wouldn't. I needed a stable environment for Ethan, and she was an excellent mother. The cost of exposing the truth to the world and to Ethan was too high. Days bled into weeks. The emotional trauma was encased in a shell of routine. We hosted friends, attended school events, and discussed blueprints and quarterly statements with the sterile efficiency of business partners. My time was spent rebuilding the mental architecture that Jennifer's lie had shattered. I returned to my clocks. I realized the profound metaphor of my craft, taking something broken, analyzing every minute gear, removing the impurities, and reassembling it until it kept perfect, measurable time. One afternoon, Lil called, interrupting my work on a complex French carriage clock. "The residual effects of the Mark Olson operation are manifesting," she reported. "His former partners are demanding explanations. He left behind a substantial hole in his client roster and several highly leveraged properties in limbo. The non-traditional lender in Bridgeport is getting nervous." "Let them be nervous," I replied. "The market will absorb the shock. Mark Olson is a non-factor. Ensure that no one connects his sudden wealth-chase departure to any of my past or present entities. The phantom fund is dissolved. The trail is cold." "Understood. But there is something else, David." I pulled the full medical history from the fertility clinic under the guise of an internal audit for your family fund's liability coverage. I had them specifically reanalyze the original diagnosis of your severe non-viability. I froze, the tiny screwdriver poised over a microscopic screw. What did they find? "The original diagnosis was correct, David. You had 0 motile sperm, but the cause was listed as idiopathic, unknown origin." My medical contacts reviewed the historical toxicology reports from the time of the sampling, around 2012-2013. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. My mind went back to the stressful, high-risk deals of that era. Tell me, Lil. The reports showed trace elements of heavy metal poisoning consistent with certain industrial solvents. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but enough to completely sterilize the sample. David, your team was heavily involved in the strategic bankruptcy of a chemical manufacturing plant in New Jersey around that time, remember? The one with the disastrous environmental fallout. You spent weeks on site, overseeing the dismantling and asset stripping. The memory hit me. The grim, dusty warehouse floors, the acrid metallic smell of the abandoned machinery, the long hours spent in cheap hotels near the toxic site. I had dismissed the persistent metallic taste in my mouth then as stress. I was sterilized by the very assets I was dismantling, I summarized, the irony a bitter chemical burn in my throat. It seems likely, David. The clinic diagnosed the effect, but not the cause. You weren't genetically broken. You were environmentally contaminated. I slowly lowered the screwdriver. The knowledge didn't change the fact that Ethan wasn't my biological son, but it profoundly changed the narrative. Jennifer hadn't lied to a biologically fit man. She had lied to a man who was already a victim of his own ruthless ambition. My past had literally poisoned my future. Thank you, Lil. This information stays buried. Do not put this in writing. This changes nothing about the current family structure. I hung up, staring at the perfect silver mechanism of the clock. My life was not a beautiful, precise instrument. It was a broken one, constantly needing recalibration and repairs. But the damage had not come from Jennifer's deceit alone. It had come from the toxic fallout of the man I used to be. The realization brought a strange clarity. I had spent 10 years believing I was genetically incapable, and Jennifer had used that belief to justify her desperate act. The real villain wasn't Mark, or even Jennifer. The real villain was the price of power, the silent, invisible consequence of the life I had chosen. I had destroyed Mark Olson to protect Ethan, and I was satisfied. But the war wasn't over. The battle for internal peace, for reconciling the truth with the beautiful lie of fatherhood, had just begun. And for that, I had to look at Ethan, not with the eyes of a strategist, but with the eyes of a father who understood that true legacy is forged, not inherited. The truth about the environmental sterilization settled over me, not as a source of self-pity, but as a final, bitter lesson in cause and effect. I had built a fortune on the principle that there are no unintended consequences, only consequences you failed to account for. In my single-minded pursuit of financial dominance, I had ignored the most basic risk, my own physical integrity. I had paid the ultimate price for my ruthless ambition, the loss of my biological future. This new knowledge gave me a strange kind of peace regarding Jennifer. Her desperation now felt less like pure betrayal and more like a misguided, catastrophic attempt to fix a problem that my past had created. It didn't excuse the lie, but it reframed the motive. The contempt I felt for her was now diluted by a weary understanding. Life resumed its steady, controlled rhythm. Jennifer maintained the boundaries I had set. Our relationship was a meticulously managed co-parenting fund. We were partners in the preservation of the asset. Ethan, oblivious, thrived. He was turning 11, and the annual ritual was approaching. The father-son weekend camping trip we took every spring to the deep woods of Vermont. It was our tradition, a chance to shed the veneer of Greenwich wealth and connect with something real, something primal. As I packed the gear, the sturdy canvas tent, the fishing rods, the cast iron skillet, I looked at his worn-out compass. He'd had it since he was 5. It was cheap plastic, but he treasured it. I realized this trip was my true test. Could I look at this boy, knowing his biological origin, and still feel the absolute, unquestionable sovereignty of fatherhood? Could I truly sever the connection between blood and identity? The drive north was filled with the usual stream of Ethan's questions about trees, stars, and the proper way to tie a fishing knot. His questions were detailed, demanding precision, a trait he inherited from both Jennifer and the training I had instilled. We reached the remote campsite deep in the Green Mountain National Forest. The air was cool, smelling of pine and damp earth. Setting up the camp was our silent choreography. I handled the structure. He organized the internal components. That night, after a simple dinner of chili and cornbread, we sat by the fire. The Vermont sky was unfiltered by city light, blazing with stars. "Dad," Ethan said, skipping stones across the surface of the Black Lake, "what's the most important thing you ever built?" I watched the ripples spread out, distorting the reflections of the stars. Most people would say the funds I managed, or the deals I closed. But those are just numbers, Ethan. They disappear. So what is it? I paused, choosing my words with the care of a master clockmaker placing a hairspring. The most important thing I ever built was the framework for my life after I stopped chasing money. The ability to stop, to look at the world around me, and to know what truly matters. I built this quiet. I built this time with you. Did you ever regret stopping work so early? I regretted the cost of that work sometimes, I admitted. The focus required, the things I ignored. But I never regretted stepping away to become your father. He looked up at the stars, serious for his age. It's weird how connected everything is, isn't it? The stars, the trees, us. It is, I agreed. We look for connections everywhere. We look for the lineage, the path from A to B. But sometimes, the strongest connections are the ones that don't follow the line. They are the connections you choose to forge. I was talking about DNA, about Mark, about Jennifer is lie, and about my own poisoning. But Ethan, of course, heard only the wisdom of a man teaching him about life. The next morning, while Ethan was off searching for kindling, I pulled out a small, worn leather case from my pack. Inside was a heavy silver pocket watch. It was not an antique I was restoring. It was a Patek Philippe I had bought in Geneva on the day I signed the paperwork finalizing my retirement. I called Ethan over. "Ethan, come here. I want to show you something." He walked over, his hands full of dry leaves. "This watch," I said, opening the case. "It's special. It represents something important. It's a mechanism of impossible precision, thousands of parts working in perfect synchronization. And it was made to be passed down. It represents lineage, time, and responsibility." I handed it to him. It was heavy in his small hand. "It's beautiful, Dad. But you said you don't like to give me things this expensive." "This isn't just expensive, son. It's a symbol. It's what I want you to remember about your legacy. Your legacy isn't written in a bank account, or in a legal contract, or even in the biological code you inherited. Your legacy is the mechanism you build for your life. The structure, the integrity, the ability to keep true time, regardless of the chaos outside." I looked him straight in the eye. "I chose to be your father, Ethan. Every decision I make, every choice is based on that choice. You're my son, not by accident, but by absolute intention. He didn't need to understand the subtext. He only needed to understand the unwavering commitment. He held the watch carefully, the weight seeming to instill a new seriousness in him. "Thank you, Dad," he said simply. In that moment, watching him absorb the responsibility and the significance of the gift, the last vestiges of my doubt crumbled. Mark Olson was a footnote. Jennifer's lie was a catalyst. The toxicity of my past was irrelevant. Ethan was mine because I was his. The bond was forged in shared history, in intention, and in the sheer, overwhelming effort of raising him. I had eliminated the threat. I had rebuilt my marriage into a functioning partnership. And now, I had cemented the final, non-negotiable truth of my life. A truth stronger than any biological fact. I was his father. And that connection was now truly, irrevocably protected. Returning from Vermont, the silence in the Greenwich house was different. It was no longer the heavy silence of unresolved conflict, but the steady, mature quiet of a system operating under high, controlled pressure. The episode with Mark was a closed chapter, but the lesson had to be applied to the remaining structural damage. My relationship with Jennifer. We were functioning, but efficiency is not intimacy. I knew that for Ethan's sake, we couldn't exist in a permanent state of Cold War. I had to ensure that the fear that drove Jennifer's original betrayal, the fear of disappointment, the desperate desire to please, was permanently neutralized. One evening, after Ethan was asleep, Jennifer found me in the kitchen, reading the financial news, though my mind was far away from the market fluctuations. She approached cautiously. "I saw Ethan with the watch. It's a beautiful gesture, David. He understands how important that is." "He needed a marker," I said, without looking up. "A tangible point of reference for the concept of lineage, defined by choice, not by chance." She sat down opposite me. "We need to talk about what happens next. Not about Mark, but about us. I know I deserve your contempt, but I need to know the terms of our survival." I closed the paper slowly and met her gaze. "The terms are this: no more secrets. Ever. Not about the past, and certainly not about the future. I need absolute transparency, because I can only manage risk when I have all the data. I accept that. But David, 10 years ago, when I did it, I convinced myself it was the only way to save you from that final disappointment, to give you the son you deserved." I looked at the weary lines around her eyes, the decade of guilt she had carried. It was time to introduce the final piece of data, the one that exonerated me from being the biologically flawed partner and pinned the systemic failure squarely on the life I had chosen. "That wasn't your burden to carry, Jennifer," I said quietly. "And you didn't need to save me from a biological failure. You needed to save me from the consequences of my own ambition." I told her about Lil's discovery. I told her about the industrial solvents, the New Jersey site, the toxicity reports that confirmed my temporary sterilization was environmental, a direct result of the chemical plant bankruptcy I had orchestrated. She listened, aghast, her hands covering her mouth. "The lie you told," I explained, "was based on the faulty premise that I was genetically flawed. The truth is, my body was contaminated by the pursuit of wealth. I was sterilized by my former life. You didn't betray a healthy man. You betrayed a poisoned one." The effect of this revelation was immediate and powerful. The shame left her eyes, replaced by a profound, terrible understanding. "I took the worst risk of my life," she whispered, "to fix the disaster that your worst risk created." "See, exactly," I affirmed. "We both failed. I failed by allowing the system to contaminate me. You failed by choosing a secret, known source over the anonymity of the official process. But we both did it for the same reason, Ethan: to ensure his existence." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the manicured perfection of our Greenwich lawn. "I destroyed Mark Olson because he represented a structural threat to the structure we built. But I won and destroy this family. We were flawed from the start, Jennifer, built on a lie and contaminated by my past. But we have a chance to rebuild it now, not as husband and wife, but as two responsible partners who understand the cost of deception and the absolute value of the asset we share." "So, what is the new structure?" she asked. "It is a life defined by proactive defense, not reactive damage control. We are a fortress, Jennifer. Every wall must be solid, every contract must be airtight. We are dedicated to nurturing and protecting Ethan, understanding that his legacy is the one we forge for him, not the one he inherited. We remain together, strong but transparent. Our marriage is a limited partnership, strictly governed by the mutual interest of our son." She came over to me, and for the first time since the confession, she didn't seem afraid. She seemed resolved. "A limited partnership, with an unlimited dedication to Ethan," she agreed, extending her hand. I took her hand. It wasn't the touch of a lover or a spouse. It was the firm, steady grip of a co-signer, a partner agreeing to the terms of a long, complicated contract. The moment was profoundly sad, but also deeply right. I had achieved the absolute strategic goal. The threat was gone, the asset was secured, and the partnership required for its maintenance was finalized. I looked at the perfectly manicured hedges outside, the symbols of our carefully maintained facade. I had lost the beautiful, simple lie of my former life. But I had gained the heavy, complex truth. Fatherhood is not a gift of biology. It is the ultimate leveraged buyout of your own life, requiring endless vigilance and an unshakable commitment to the truth, however ugly. And I, David Armstrong, was finally ready to stop managing the markets and start managing the most crucial asset of all, the integrity of my own home.